Three Girls in Brooklyn. Chapter 14. Life was pleasant in Lorimer Street, and the Nolans would have kept on living there if it hadn't been for Aunt Sissy and her big but mistaken heart. It was Sissy's business with the tricycle and the balloons that ruined and disgraced the Nolans. One day, Sissy was laid off from work and decided to go over and look after Francie and Neely while Katie was working. A block before she got to their house, her eyes were dazzled by the sun glinting off the brass handlebar of a handsome tricycle. It was a kind of vehicle that you don't see nowadays. It had a wide leather seat, big enough for two little children, with a back to it and an iron steering bar leading to the small front wheel. There were two large wheels in the back. There was a handlebar of solid brass on top of the steering rod. The pedals were in front of the seat, and a child sat in ease, pedaled it while leaning back in the seat, and steered it with the handlebars which lay across the lap. Sissy saw that tricycle standing there unattended in front of a stoop and didn't hesitate. She took the tricycle, pulled it around to the Nolan house, got the children out and gave them a ride. Francie thought it was wonderful. She and Neely sat there in the seat, and Sissy pulled them around the block. The leather seat was warm from the sun and had a rich, expensive smell. The hot sun danced on the brass handlebar, and it looked like living fire. Francie thought that if she touched it, it would burn her hands surely. Then something happened. A small crowd bore down on them, headed by a hysterical woman and a bawling boy. The woman rushed at Sissy, yelling, "Robber!" She grabbed the handlebars and pulled, and Sissy held on tightly. Francie almost got thrown out. The cop on the beat came rushing up. "What's this? What's this?" Thus he took over. "This lady is a robber," reported the woman. "She stole my little boy's tricycle." "I didn't steal it, Sergeant," Sissy said in her soft, appealing voice. "It was just standing there, so I borrowed it to give the kids a ride. They never rode in such a fine tricycle. You know what a ride means to a kid. It's just heaven." The cop stared at the mute children in the seat. Francie grinned a little in trembling panic. "I was only going to ride them once around the block and then take it back. Honest, Sarge." The cop let his eyes rest on Sissy's well-shaped bust, which was not spoiled by the tight waist she liked to wear. He turned to the harassed mother. "What do you want to be so stingy for, lady?" he said. "Let her give the kids a ride around the block. It ain't no skin off your teeth." Only he didn't say teeth to the snickering delight of the youngsters clustered around. "Let her give them a spin, and I'll see that you get the bike back safe." He was the law. What could the woman do? The cop gave the bawling kid a nickel and told him to shut up. He dispersed the crowd very simply by telling them he'd send for the pie wagon and take them all down to the station house if they didn't 23 skidoo. The crowd scattered. The cop, swinging his club, gallantly escorted Sissy and her charges around the block. Sissy looked up at him and smiled into his eyes, whereupon he stuck his club in his belt and insisted on pulling the bike for her. Sissy trotted along beside him on her high, tiny-heeled shoes and cast a spell over him with her soft, fluttery voice. They walked around the block 3 times. The cop pretending not to notice the hands that went up to hide the smiles as people saw a fully uniformed officer of the law so engaged. He talked warmly to Sissy, mostly about his wife, who was a good woman, you understand, but you know, a kind of an invalid. Sissy said she understood. After the bike episode, people talked. They talked enough about Johnny coming home drunk once in a while, and about how the men looked at Sissy. Now they had this to add on. Katie thought of moving. It was getting like Bogart Street, where the neighbors knew too much about the Nolans. While Katie was thinking about looking for another place, something else happened, and they had to move right away. The thing that finally drove them from Lorimer Street was stark, raw sex. Only it was very innocent looked at in the right way. One Saturday afternoon, Katie had an odd job at Gorling's, a large department store in Williamsburg. She fixed coffee and sandwiches for the Saturday night supper that the boss gave the girls in lieu of overtime money. Johnny was at the union headquarters waiting for a job to find him. Sissy wasn't working that day. Knowing that the children would be left alone locked in the rooms, she decided to keep them company. She knocked at the door, Calling out that she was Aunt Sissy, Francie opened the door on the chain to make sure before she let her in. The children swarmed over Sissy, smothering her with hugs. They loved her. To them, she was a beautiful lady who always smelled sweet, wore beautiful clothes, and brought them amazing presents. Today, she brought them a sweet-smelling cedar cigar box, several sheets of tissue paper, some red, some white, and a jar of paste. They sat around the kitchen table and went to work decorating the box. Sissy outlined the circles on the paper with a quarter, and Francie cut them out. Sissy showed them how to make them into little paper cups by molding the circles around the end of a pencil. When they had a lot of cups made, Sissy drew a heart on the box cover. The bottom of each red cup was given a dab of paste, and the cup was pasted to the penciled heart. The heart was filled with red cups. The rest of the lid was filled in with white. When the top was finished, it looked like a bed of closely packed white carnations with a heart of red ones. The sides were filled in with the white cups, and inside lined with red tissue. You could never tell it had been a cigar box. It was that beautiful. The box took up most of the afternoon. Sissy had a chop suey date at 5, and she got ready to leave. Francie clung to her and begged her not to go. Sissy hated to leave, yet she didn't want to miss her date. She searched in her purse for something to amuse them in her absence. They stood at her knee, helping her look. Francie spied a cigarette box and pulled it out. On the cover was the picture of a man lying on a couch, knees crossed, one foot dangling in the air, smoking a cigarette, which made a big smoke ring over his head. In the ring was a picture of a girl with her hair in her eyes and her bust popping out of her dress. The name on the box was American Dreams. It was out of the stock at Sissy's factory. The children clamored for the box. Sissy reluctantly let them have it after explaining that the box contained cigarettes and was only to hold and to look at, and not under any circumstances to be opened. They must not touch the seals, she said. After she left, the children amused themselves for a time by staring at the picture. They shook the box. A dull, swishing, mysterious sound resulted. "They is snakes there and not zingarettes," decided Neely. "No," corrected Francie. "Worms are in there, live ones." They argued, Francie saying the box was too small for snakes, and Neely insisting that they were rolled up snakes like herring in a glass jar. Curiosity grew to such a pitch that Sissy's instructions were forgotten. The seals were so lightly pasted, it was a simple matter to pull them off. Francie opened the box. There was a sheet of soft, dull tin foil over the contents. Francie lifted the foil carefully. Neely prepared to crawl under the table if the snakes became active. There were neither snakes, worms, nor cigarettes in the box, and its contents were very uninteresting. After trying to devise some simple games, Francie and Neely lost interest, clumsily tied the contents of the box to a string, trailed the string out the window, and finally secured the string by shutting the window on it. Then they took turns jumping on the denuded box and became so absorbed in breaking it into bits that they forgot all about the string hanging out the window. Consequently, there was a surprise waiting for Johnny when he sauntered home to get a fresh dicky and collar for his evening's job. He took one look and his face burned with shame. He told Katie when she came home. Katie questioned Francie closely and found out everything. Sissy was condemned. That night, after the children had been put to bed and Johnny was away working, Katie sat in her dark kitchen with the blushes coming and going. Johnny went about his work with a dull feeling that the world had come to an end. Evie came over later in the evening and she and Katie discussed Sissy. "That's the end, Katie," said Evie. "The very end. What Sissy does is her own business, until her own business makes a thing like this happen. I've got a growing girl, so have you. We mustn't let Sissy come into our homes again. She's bad and there's no getting around it." "She's good in many ways," temporized Katie. "You say that after what she did to you today?" "Well, I guess you're right. Only don't tell Mother. She doesn't know how Sissy lives, and Sissy is her eye apple." When Johnny came home, Katie told him that Sissy was never to come to their house again. Johnny sighed and said he guessed it was the only thing to do. Johnny and Katie talked away the night, and in the morning they had their plans all made for moving when the end of the month came. Katie found a janitor place on Grand Street in Williamsburg. She took up the tin can bank when they moved. There was a little over $8 in it. 2 more had to go to the movers. The rest was put back when the can was nailed down in the new home. Again, Mary Romilly came and sprinkled the flat with holy water. Again, there was the settling of process and the establishing of trust or credit at the neighborhood stores. There was a resigned regret that the new flat was not as nice as their Lorimar Street home. They lived on the top floor instead of the ground floor. There was no stoop as a store occupied the main store of the house. There was no bathroom, and the toilet was in the hall and shared by 2 families. The only bright spot was that the roof was theirs. By an unwritten agreement, the roof belonged to the people who lived on the top floor, as the yard belonged to the people who lived on the first floor. Another advantage was that there was no one living overhead to make vibrations on the ceiling and cause the Welsbach gas mantle to crumble into powder. While Katie was arguing with the movers, Johnny took Francie up on the roof. She saw a whole new world. Not far away was the lovely span of the Williamsburg Bridge. Across the East River, like a fairy city made of silver cardboard, the skyscrapers loomed cleanly. There was the Brooklyn Bridge further away, like an echo of the nearer bridge. "It's pretty," said Francie. "It's pretty the same way pictures of in-country are pretty." "I go over that bridge sometimes when I go to work," said Johnny. Francie looked at him in wonder. He went over that magic bridge and still talked and looked like always? She couldn't get over it. She put out her hand and touched his arm. Surely the wonderful experience of going over that bridge would make him feel different. She was disappointed because his arm felt as it always had felt. At the children's touch, Johnny put his arm around her and smiled down at her. "How old are you, prima donna?" "I'm 6, going on 7. "Why, you'll be going to school in September." "No, Mama said I must wait until next year, till Neely's old enough so we can start together." "Why?" "So we can help each other against the older kids who might lick us if there was only one." "Your mother always thinks of everything." Francie turned around and looked at the other roofs. Nearby was one with a pigeon coop on top. The pigeons were safely locked up, but a pigeon owner, a youth of 17, stood on the edge of the roof with a long bamboo stick. It had a rag on the end, and the boy stood waving the stick in circles. Another flock of pigeons was flying around in a circle. One of them left the group to follow the flying rag. The boy lowered the stick cautiously, and the silly pigeon followed the rag. The boy grabbed him and stuck him in the coop. Francie was distressed. "That boy stole a pigeon." "And tomorrow someone will steal one of his," said Johnny. "But the poor pigeon was taken away from his relations. Maybe he's got children." Tears came into her eyes. "I wouldn't cry," said Johnny. "Maybe the pigeon wanted to get away from his relatives. If he doesn't like the new coop, he'll fly back to the old one when he gets out again." Francie was consoled. They didn't say anything for a long time. They stood hand in hand on the roof's edge, looking across the river to New York. Finally, Johnny said, as if to himself, 7 years. "What, Papa?" "Your Mama and I have been married 7 years already." "Was I here when you got married?" "No." "I was here, though, when Neely came." "That's right." Johnny went back to thinking aloud. "Married 7 years, and we've had 3 homes. This will be my last home." Francie didn't notice that he said "my last home" instead of "our last home."